In the last winter of a war that had already taken so much, a boy in the Netherlands lay in bed, too weak to stand. He hadn't had a full meal in months. His mother had actually started boiling tulip bulbs just to put something warm in his stomach. And then one morning, he heard something in the sky that made his mother run outside and fall to her knees. It wasn't the sound of bombers coming to destroy his city. It was the sound of bombers coming to save it. Part 1. The Hunger Winter. A country going quiet. To understand what happened in that sky, we really have to go back a little further, to a country that was slowly running out of everything. By the autumn of 1944, most of Europe could see the end of the war coming. Allied forces had pushed the front lines forward, and liberation felt close for many. But for one small country, the Netherlands, freedom stopped just short of the finish line. You see, the western part of the country was still under occupation, and when Dutch railway workers went on strike to help the Allied advance, the occupying forces answered by cutting off food and fuel supplies to the entire region. What followed is now remembered as the Hunger Winter. Canals froze over. Coal disappeared. Food that once filled market stalls became nothing more than a memory. People walked for hours into the countryside, trading wedding rings and family heirlooms just for a handful of potatoes or a bag of grain. They ate sugar beets meant for livestock. They ground tulip bulbs into flour. They even boiled leather to soften it enough to chew. By the time spring approached, more than 20,000 people had died of hunger. Not soldiers, not just statistics on a map. These were grandparents, neighbors, children who had simply stopped growing. Part 2. An unlikely truce, an unlikely agreement. Word of the famine eventually reached the outside world. Dutch officials in exile pleaded for help. Allied commanders knew that food convoys alone just couldn't move fast enough. The only way to reach millions of starving people in time was from the air. But there was a massive problem. The sky above the Netherlands was still an active battlefield. German anti-aircraft units controlled it. Any low, slow-flying aircraft would normally be an incredibly easy target. So something unusual happened. Something that rarely happens in the middle of a war. Through careful, quiet diplomacy, an understanding was reached between enemies. The Allies would not bomb German positions in the region. In return, German commanders on the ground would allow unarmed aircraft to fly low over the cities without firing a single shot. No treaty was signed. No headlines announced it. It was simply an agreement between people who, for just a few days, chose to see each other as human beings first and soldiers second. Part 3. Operation Manna begins. Bomb bays full of bread. On April 29, 1945, British bombers took off from their airfields. Now these were the exact same aircraft that had spent years carrying explosives over enemy territory. But this time, their holds were packed differently. Instead of bombs, they carried flour, tinned meat, dried eggs, chocolate, and sacks of grain. Millions of pounds of food stacked right where destruction used to sit. The mission was named Operation Manna. Days later, American aircraft joined with a mission of their own, called Chowhound. The planes flew low, sometimes only a few hundred feet above the rooftops, slow enough that the people below could actually see the pilots' faces. And the people came outside. They stood in open fields and on flattened rooftops. Some had spent their absolute last bit of strength just walking there. They waved bedsheets, tablecloths, anything white they could find, not as a symbol of surrender, but as a signal of welcome. Survivors would later describe hearing the drone of those engines and feeling their whole body go still, unsure for a terrifying moment whether to run for shelter or stay in hope. Then the first sacks began to fall, and the sky that had only ever brought fear started delivering flour instead. Part 4. Tears in the Fields. Food from the sky. Picture it for a moment. Not just as history, but as something happening right in front of you. You're standing in a field that has given you nothing to eat in weeks. Your shoes are worn through. Your children haven't asked for food today because they've learned that asking just doesn't help. And then the sky fills with a low hum of engines you've learned to fear. Every instinct tells you to run, but someone besides you isn't running. They're waving a white sheet over their head, tears already on their face before a single sack has even fallen. You look up, and for the first time in months, the aircraft above you aren't carrying your death. They're carrying your next meal. People fell to their knees in open fields. Some laughed, some sobbed uncontrollably. Some simply stood in silence, watching flour drift down like the gentlest kind of snow. A pilot flying that day later said he had dropped bombs on this very same region less than 2 weeks earlier. Now, he was crying at the controls. Watching people wave up at him was something that looked, unmistakably, like gratitude. Between the two operations, more than 11,000 tons of food reached a population that had almost completely given up hope of surviving the spring. Part 5. A kindness that didn't end. Tulips for Canada. The war in Europe ended just days after those flights, but the memory of that spring, it never really left the Netherlands. A similar story unfolded around the same time, when the Dutch royal family, sheltered in Canada during the occupation, welcomed a new princess born on Canadian soil. When peace finally came, the Dutch people sent thousands of tulip bulbs to Canada as a thank you for that shelter, and for the country's vital role in their liberation. And that gift never stopped. Even now, every single year, thousands of tulips still arrive in Ottawa from the Netherlands. Each spring, an entire city blooms in quiet memory of a kindness shown decades ago. It's a strange and beautiful thing that flowers can carry memory further than any monument. That something as fragile as a tulip petal can outlast a war. Part 6. A choice to help. The power of kindness. Operation Manna lasted only a handful of days. It didn't end the war, it didn't undo the suffering that had already happened. 22,000 people were already gone, and no amount of bread falling from the sky could bring them back. But for the people who lived through it, those few days meant something that outlasted the hunger itself. They were proof that even in the absolute worst version of humanity, someone can choose the better version instead. It didn't matter in that moment what language the pilots spoke, what god they prayed to, or which side of a border they'd been born on. For a few days in the spring of 1945, the only thing that mattered was that people were hungry and other people had the power to feed them. That's really the whole story, isn't it? Not armies, not treaties. Just one simple, quiet decision repeated by thousands of ordinary people. When you have the power to cause harm, you can choose to offer help instead. We don't often get to drop bread from the sky for someone, but we all get smaller versions of that exact same choice, almost every single day. A moment where we could look away, or we could show up. Somewhere, someone is still waiting for their sky to change. If this story moves something in you, that feeling is worth holding on to. Here at Beautiful Voices, we look for these moments. Small, true stories about the better side of people, and we tell them slowly, gently, the way they deserve to be told. If you'd like to keep finding stories like this one, stay with Beautiful Voices. Thank you for watching, and for feeling this with us.